everybody. Welcome to Moenraj and Rosenbaum Are Humans. I'm Marianne Moenraj. I'm Marianne Moenraj. You're stepping on my intro, dude.
That's the thing. I always say we're so we claim when you say we're humans. Sorry.
And I'm here with my co-host.
Benjamin Rosenbaum.
Benjamin Rosenbaum for the
famous stepper-on of intros.
That's right. For the Speculative Literature Foundation podcast, and we are super excited today to be interviewing the author of OKPsyche, Anya DeNiro, and we're going to just rave about this book. So I'm thrilled. So it blew me away. So
yeah, me too. I thought it was great.
Before the podcast started, we were talking about the title. So
yeah. Well, and we were just yeah. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, it's just a play on words with, kind of from two ways with the Cupid and Psyche myth, and also the dating app OkCupid. So it's an inversion of that, Cupid being the god of love and Psyche being kind of the soul. So it's it's also just like a little bit of a wellness pun too. Like your psyche's okay, like you're gonna be okay too.
Yeah.
So that's and so that interplay like shows up a lot in the book too. So
yeah, and also sort of Cupid is the one with the power in the stories. OkPsyche is also kind of from below kind of thing. You know what I mean? In a way. I mean,
yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. And a lot of it is like directed like via Cupid from Venus or Aphrodite to Cupid too. So that's right. That shows up in the book.
She's pulling
too.
The strings. Yeah.
All right, I'm going to back us up because we didn't We didn't do a proper intro or anything. So let me tell you all about Anya Johanna DeNiro. So just a few things. Anya has a novella out, City of a Thousand Feelings, that was published by Aqueduct Press in 2020, was on the honor roll for the Otherwise Award. OKPsyche just came out this September 2023 from Small Bear Press. Anya has been published in many venues, including One Story, Catapult, Asimov, Santa Monica Review, Diagram, and for me, very excitingly, Strange Horizons, which I think is how we met way back in the early days of Strange Horizons when we were hosting Strange Horizons tea parties at WisCon. And I would stand on the chair and tell people like, hey, all of you who are published with us, shout out. And we would have a whole bunch of them. And it was so exciting. I loved it.
I think I went to the first tea party.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I was there.
Yes.
Yeah. So those were kind of, I remember those as glory days. There was like karaoke and
petty times.
Small beer was like, I'm also a small beer guy. So that back when Kevin and Kelly used to come to WisCon and anyway.
Yes. So this is you're getting, podcast listeners, you're getting a little bit of old home week here. And if you have not yet seen Ben perform 99 Luftballons during karaoke,
German,
you are missing out. You are, it is a whole body experience, both for Ben and the audience. So, all right, back to Anya, who's been a finalist.
No, it's all good.
The Crawford Award and the Theodore Sturgeon Award, longlisted for the Frank O'Connor International Short Story Award, and this is your first full-length book, yes?
Yeah. Under the name Anya, like under my dead name. Yeah. Okay. So it's. Yeah, so I published under my den name. I published 2 short story collections with Small Beer. Then I had a novel come out from Bantam Valentine.
Oh, okay.
Like kind of called Total Oblivion, more or less. So, but I have a really weird relationships with those books. So, I after transitioning, so they're kind of like in this undead state, if you will, so
that must be very interesting. I know, I mean, I worked with closely with Avery Alder, who I did a game with, and she did essentially, I think, one of the motivations for Monster Hearts 2. I mean, there's a bunch of motivations. There's a bunch of things she wanted to revisit.
Sure.
Like she had a hit game, Monster Hearts, but I think like having the right name on the cover was like a big, was like a part of it.
And actually, I can't really do that with, Penguin Random House, but I mean, Gavin Grant and I had a conversation about it. He's like, look, do you want these books in print? I really don't. And
Okay.
so he took them out of print. So which I that kind of shows kind of the ethos and the care of
Small Beer,
Small Beer Press, which I
they're
really
amazing.
Appreciate. Yeah.
So we haven't said anything about what the book is about, and I'm a little hesitant to try to summarize it. So I'm wondering whether Anya, maybe you wanted to start us off.
Isn't it mean to make someone summarize their own book?
No, well, I mean, just
Okay. I just hate the elevator pitch.
I can give it a shot.
All right, go.
I don't know if I can do an elevator pitch, but I think. Okay, so the book I should say first is in second person POV.
Which I also want to talk about.
Yeah, it's an unnamed trans woman who is kind of like what I would call like post-transition in a lot of ways, but still figuring things out. It's I think a story about her creating a sense of interior, like she has a sense of interiority, but kind of bringing that into the external world, and there's a lot of anxiety that that kind of mediates that. So there's there's a lot of like imaginary people. There's like her father who may be dead, like all of these presences, and so it's in a way like getting into the guts of it. It's really a novel about creating personhood through just trial and error in a lot of ways. So it is so and in the midst of that, it intersects with kind of like various overlapping dystopias that kind of fade in and out of view as well, that are kind of like always shifting around. So I don't know if that explains it very well. Like it's very very singular. A lot of it's just stuck in the main character's head, and so like perhaps like towards the very end where it kind of opens up a little bit. So there's also John Keats. Yeah, go for it.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. Say the last thing. I want to rave about it.
There's also a John Keats. There's also a John Keats poem in there. OKPsyche. There's some mythological stuff with like the Cupid and Psyche myth kind of weaves in and out of the book as well. So.
Yeah, and which is the thing about the project of selfhood and the soul and psyche, the grappling with the myth of psyche. I mean, even on the first page, it's sort of like it's the way it begins. You have struggled for a long time as to whether you have a soul or not. Like there's this this question of interiority, and I think it's the I mean, I want to talk about. I'm really curious about the second person thing. I want to talk about what it does with genre, which I think is really fascinating because it's a very There's a great way in which a bunch of the themes dovetail. One is that the protagonist has had this, it's about transition, but it's really about the shattering of the person's old selfhood in a way, like or the pretense of selfhood that they were living inside of or whatever, and having to rebuild themselves and their life. and so, or herself in her life, the protagonist, and it's like that is sort of paralleled with the shatterings in the world. And so there's this thing about this dystopian thing. There's a couple of different techniques, which I think really interesting genre-wise. One is that you get the sense that the protagonist keeps driving by dystopias. Like we keep getting out the window of the car, like the fact that there are armored cars going in their other direction, or there's like, abandoned, like she goes to see people and they're in like, clearly it's like an America falling apart, but in a way that's kind of liminal, where like half the time you're like, well, particularly my experience as someone reading this in Switzerland as an American expat, where half the time I'm like AK-7s in the department store. No, actually, that probably does happen in America. Like, it's on that line of like, I'm like, is this dystopian science fiction or is this real? And I think it's doing that intentionally. The effect is probably exaggerated by my distance from the scene, but it's great how it's like got this, keeps you guessing of like what is actually going on. But then that mirrors the fact that the protagonist is so this work of creating herself and defending the boundaries of herself and everything is so occupying of her attention. She's had to go so far in and is only now coming out that like a lot of what that does wonderfully is it's like she doesn't really have time to deal with it. So you're just seeing this dystopia in the background. She's like, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm sort of curious whether this seems like a fair comparison to you, but when I was reading this book, it honestly reminded me a lot of Martha Wells's Murderbot, in specifically the kind of, here's someone who's gone through trauma and it's a very slow process for Murderbot of rebuilding post-trauma, and whose previous sense of self, they'd been defined a certain way by the culture, by the community, etc. And that is shattered, they shatter it, and then have to reconstruct from there to who they authentically are. Does that? Yeah. I felt like people who love Murderbot, you got to read this book. It's very different. It's interesting, but there's like some real resonances, I think.
Yeah, I actually wrote an essay for Tor.com about reading Murderbot, at least the first book, from a trans lens. And of just how that resonated, with their experiences. So,
nice.
That feels I hadn't thought of it specifically with this book, but that feels very apt.
So I didn't make it up. That's nice.
Yeah.
And the other genre thing, I don't know if you want to say anything about the dystopia thing, but the other genre thing that's interesting is the kind of a genre that I love, which I feel like this also draws on, which is sort of like not exactly an unreliable narrator, but it's sort of a literary metafictional, not metafictional, like the fact that you don't know which characters are real or not. Like when we first meet the dad, like the way the what might be the dad, like the fact that you're like not grounded in what's going on here in this way that seems very much in this kind of, I don't know, I want to say maybe postmodernist, I don't know, like Bartholomew, Borgesian, I don't know, this thing that's going on where it's like between the reader and the book, you're not comfortably situated in a seamless narrative where like just stuff is happening and you get to kick back. You're kind of at the edge of your seat going like, what am I, is that the, because I mean, I love the bit where some random sales associate is hassling the protagonist, and then the protagonist is like, "All right, do you have your truck here? Let's just get the stuff and go." And I'm like, "What's the relation?" And then the protagonist, then the random sales associate started being like, "I just wish I brought you up." And I was like, "Is what's happening?" And it's there's this wonderful polyvalent set of things. Is the protagonist hallucinating this? Is this the dad? It's simply the dad works at Walmart. The dad is not dead. The protagonist isn't claiming that the dad is dead, like telling herself the dad is dead, but the dad is just at Walmart being a disapproving jerk, or is like it and actually a sales associate at Walmart, and the protagonist has like put it, like inserted into them the spirit of the dad is possessing, you know what I mean? Like there's and the book never really collapses what's going on, which I think is a wonderful there's an electricity to the reader having to be so active in navigating through the sea of possible meanings, right?
Yeah, and I don't know either. I don't have a clear idea of that either.
I
refuse to.
Yeah, I like the connection.
Right. Well, I mean, I don't think it would work. I don't think it would
Yeah.
work if there was one. I don't think it would work if there was one secret, real, correct interpretation in a way.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that that you have this balancing act of like possible interpretations.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was
What were
just
you going to say, Marianne?
just that I like the connection you draw to Borges. I recently taught his Tlon Akbar Orbis Tertius, which is this which my students had a little trouble with because it's a very literary, complex, subtle, confusing story in which you very slowly come to an understanding that maybe the world is being like rewritten by this fantasy world, essentially, or by this other world, right? Like that the world you thought you knew is no longer the real world, I guess.
Right.
And I feel like there's a similar I like the unsettlingness, I guess, of both that story and this book, right? In that it really is. I felt like your book, Anya, was inviting me to question every assumption, right? Like everything I thought, everything I took for granted. Maybe I shouldn't be taking it for granted. Maybe I should interrogate that, right? So
like Kobo Abi, the box man, is another example of that. Like the kind of okay, but like the kind of alienation of the where you're like, is the protagonist, like, to what extent are they making this up, or like what's going, like that sort of very sort of exciting feeling of decoherence of the way we usually read the text. Anyway, so I thought that was really cool. A lot of stuff it was doing on a genre. Yeah.
No, go ahead. I was just gonna say, I was gonna jump off from there and say,
go ahead.
Like I feel like we're making this sound like super intellectual, which it is. But my experience reading the book was not like that with the Borges, and my students experienced the Borges, right, where they were just confused and struggling. I don't think it works so well with this one, with Anya's book, is that it grounds you in pain from the first page. And
it's super emotionally grounded. And that's the other thread I was going to say. There's sort of a bunch of things going on. And one is this very raw, in addition to that, there's sort of these different kinds of, I mean, the language is beautiful and really, brilliant. Just a million phrases I want to quote. And then there's like this sort of science fictional thing going on. There's some sort of magical realist or science or fantastical things that are happening, like the dystopia in the background, and like the sort of secret underground people she's meeting, very Thomas Pynchon Lee, who have like kind of mysterious powers. But then also like there's this very immediate, raw, like realistic story of her. Like all of that is juxtaposed to a lot of just like people in the drugstore, like the terror of like, are they gonna gender her correctly, and are they gonna like get start acting weirdly toxic? And there's this way in which those things support each other, because there's bits where it feels like a spy novel where she's in enemy territory and anybody might jump and attack her at any time, and that's not the fantastical part of the book. That's just the realistic part. And so they dovetail and reinforce each other. But yeah, it's really grounded. It's really never gets far from this emotional center of, as wild like that. There's these wild things going on in terms of what it's doing in terms of prose and style. And although it's not like it's hard. It's not like the language is beautiful, but it's also just deployed with restraint. Like that's also, I feel like that it's wonderfully, you can see people with a flair for language maturing as artists, where is often a process of them reining it in, to where it's like just doing its job but not getting in the way. But like I don't know, that it's always connected to this. It doesn't wander away from the emotional core of the story. It's just like these different tools. Sometimes you're in this very, very realistic, social realist, what's happening to people right now. And sometimes that's framed in these ways that really support it, that are with these nods to dystopia, or with these things going on with her, the struggle to recreate her selfhood being dramatized in the kind of unreliableness of her not even us not even knowing whether what she's seeing is an imaginary person or a real person or a or or a fantastical element or a literal, you know what I mean? Like that's we're destabilized the way she's destabilized, so it really keeps connected to the emotional core of it. Anyway.
I think it sounds like you want to write an essay about this, Ben. So no, that's a good thing.
You mean I can't just ramble on a podcast about it? I thought that's
I'm just saying you could pitch tour.com. I think that would be interesting. But Anya, you look like you were about to say something before.
I mean, if we have having a conversation about that, like, and it's interesting, like, I guess what it depends what you mean by like the genre elements, because a lot of the stuff I was pulling from were, kind of literary fiction techniques and books too. And there's genre writers like, Lafferty or, Gene Wolfe, who kind of had Delaney, who have that kind of.
Well, I didn't mean to say genre as in skiffy versus norms. I meant genre in terms of like all of the genres the books pull from, like it pulls from Kobo Abe and postmodernist fabulism and like dystopian elements. I mean, it's not. But I think even with
that, but I think the moments where there are rocket ships, where there are science fictional elements, they then get again interrogated, queried.
It's not really rocket ships, but okay.
Discarded. Yes. Well, I mean, so I don't know if this is I don't think this is a spoiler, right?
It's really hard to know what's a spoiler.
There's a moment.
I feel like I already spoiled the dad in a way.
Well, there's a moment, right, with a boyfriend in a box. How's that?
Yeah.
Right? Like a constructed, like put this boyfriend together kind of thing. There's a way that would, I was sort of expecting it to play out a certain way because of my science fictional genre expectation. Yeah. And the book absolutely refuses to do that.
I mean, in a way, what the book consistently does with genre with skiffy expectations is to tease them and frustrate them. Like it keeps approaching scenes in which in the skiffy book we would find out what the conflict is between the tent encampment and the the secret underground, or we would like the sort of robotic things or the clairvoyant things would become sort of like plot points. But like, so the book continually sort of plays with these expectations, but is just using them, but just as the protagonist is like, as I said, like the protagonist is like, just really don't have time to deal with. I don't have time to deal with your collapsing dystopia. Oh my God.
Well, and this is
having my own.
So I think I kind of want to come back to trauma here, right? Because so this is, I mean, you do it very differently than I do, right? But I feel like it's a related project. When I'm writing about war in Sri Lanka and I'm telling these little stories about individuals, a lot of what I'm trying to do is show, like, at the same time that a war is evolving in the background, here is this mom who really just wants to get her kid into the best preschool, and like that is at the forefront of her mind. And everything else is background. I feel like that's something that science fiction, fantasy, maybe even more so, has this tendency to, well, we're going to tell the story of the war, and here are these big figures, and it's going to be all about like the outcome of the war. And
and that's not most people's experience of even people caught up in big historical events are like, boy, I hope the grocery store isn't bombed before I can get potatoes, because I really got to make. Right. Like,
like my kid is still having trouble pooping, like this is that kind of thing, right? You got toddlers and you're like, this is, or you're on, I'm sorry, I'm on like mom mailing lists, so I see this kind of thing coming up, and I have this wave of nostalgia, and like, thank God it's not me anymore, right? Of like my 4-year-old won't wear pull-ups at night, and I just cannot wash the sheets one more time, like that kind of thing. This book gives me the sense of, reality, emotional reality of like, here's someone moving through something in a difficult manner. And I just feel like our genre
and I feel like
in large part skims over that.
well, that you're now it's that Le Guin, Mrs. Brown on the rocket ship. That's the yes complaint. This complaint has been ongoing since the 50s. But the thing
it
that
still bugs me, Ben. It bugs me a lot.
Cool. We can link to Le Guin's essay from the 50s or 60s. Anyway, the thing about which I don't mean to be dismissive about. I'm right there with you. I just wanted to say I think the way that the book used the thing about the teasing and frustrating genre expectations. I think what work that is doing is that the book is so intensely about interiority, and it's like the trauma is reflected outward onto, like, it's like, of course there are armed camps, of course there's like the what's it, the don't tread on me flag flying over, and the black, blue line, thin blue line American flag over these militia camps. That's like an external reflection, and the protagonist doesn't have time to deal with it. It's almost sometimes funny that there's this juxtaposition between, like, I need to get these lattes somewhere before they get cold, and there's gunboats on the river, and but at the same time it's also sort of like highlights the like in a way the book refuses the ever-present accusation that it is more selfish to focus on the interiority of the self than on, you know what I mean? Like, the book is like, this is the big project.
Yeah. And I think it's just in terms of kind of the literary terminology of the conceit, not being like conceited, but the premise, or kind of the emblem of the book is that in a way is that trans women, or this trans woman, is like even allowed to have that interiority, because so much of that is the ability to have that or not have that is like superimposed from the outside. And I think, like, going back to like one of your original questions, I think that's why like the second person POV kind of helped me kind of elide that and kind of get away from kind of this memoiristic trap in a way, in order to create like some mediation between that interiority and the reader, but also kind of implicate the reader in it too. With the you.
Can I ask though? So this is, I guess, sort of transitioning to the whole second person you thing a little bit. I don't know if you're comfortable talking about, because we know you, right? As I was reading this, it was hard for me not to feel like I was reading memoir, right? And then, and I, so I kept thinking, like, oh, how much of this is drawn from personal experience? How much of it is a novel, right? And maybe could you talk about, like, your thoughts on that?
It's interesting. Yeah, well, like, one of the big influences in this book, was Elizabeth Hardwick's Sleepless Nights. I don't know if you ever read that, but it's first person, and it is very memoiristic, but she creates it as a novel, and I think that tone really spoke to me. With that said, there's a lot of, I think, the emotional aspects that are it almost gets to those contradictions, because like a lot of the emotionality in the novel is true, but a lot of it was made up to at the same, like, simultaneously. So it's almost like the way I visualize it is like just like kind of like making a smoothie of like putting all these fruits and yogurt and stuff, and like the fruits are kind of like the autobiographical experiences, and it's just kind of, it's emulsified, it's blended, and there might be like little chunks of fruit that are still in the smoothie, but it's all it's transformed through kind of the fictional conceit. So, I don't know if that's like skirting around like what is real and true, but again, like that, I think that's why I wanted to do the second person, just to have that removed from the memoiristic impulse, so, but I would say that there are, it's there is an interplay, with truth and not truth, but I would say it is all fictional, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, there's I feel like there's a process that I went through as a writer. I don't know how common it is, right? Where when I first started writing, I was writing these college erotica stories. Half of my first book is cast as fiction, but it is just nonfiction. It is, here's this thing that happened to me, I'm going to tell it as a story, right? And as I went on as a writer, that, I remember my advisor in grad school at some point said to me, Marianne, you have to start making things up, like, like if you're gonna write fiction, right? Like, I mean, it's one thing if you're gonna write memoir and that's your thing, but if you're writing fiction, make stuff up, because it allows you to go places, I think, that the sticking to the straight, like, nonfiction narrative doesn't necessarily. And it was a little bit of a tough transition for me. But then once I started doing it, it was very freeing, right? I was like, oh, it happened this way. If I do this, it'll give me access to a deeper truth, like it'll let me do things in a way that makes a better story, but also like is, I don't know. Sorry, I feel like I'm
in a way. I think what I think is funny when you said like how that's how I could tell this is a literary book, because literary authors are always asked how much of this is autobiographical, and science fiction authors are always asked where do you get your ideas. So if a literary author writes like a book in which like zombies, are eating the president's brain, people are like, how much of this is autobiographical? Yeah. And I mean, it strikes me that it's like, well, that time. I mean, the thing you said about the second person makes a lot of sense to me. That in a way, I think that it implicates the reader, and I think in a way it's to resist. Like it both opens, it both I don't know, it's an offers, but it's like there's a way in which the reader is going to read it as it's going to, and even if they don't know you, but it's inevitably like certain kinds of fiction or certain kinds of genres or literary modes, and also particularly when it's marginalized people writing, like, right, like the fact that it's a trans woman's narrative, inevitably people are like, but how much of this is real? But that always strikes me as like
100%.
Yeah, and it's sort of like, yeah, like there's this tourism, and so I think is partly, it feels like that's partly what it's disrupting, that in a way. Like it's sort of defying the interpretive pull of memoir or whatever. And the thing about it is that it's like it strikes me that, like, I mean, I don't know if I've ever written anything that's that autobiographical, but of course you're always you're always cribbing things. Yeah. Like you're always taking individual, like your life is sort of a cutting room floor in a way, but it's also like the most autobiographical confessional stuff. It's not really autobiographical. You know what I mean? Like the Taylor Swift character in Blank Space, not actually Taylor Swift, right?
Right.
It's like even if you're in this mode of extremely confessional, and part of your marketing proposal is that like this album will be about the next breakup, right? Like still, it's obviously like a created, performed product.
Yeah.
And so anyway, that's when that resonated when you said that about the second person. In a way, it's sort of like it's sort of defying that urge or something, or complicating it.
Yeah. And in the middle, like it does, I mean, the novel does have those zombies eating the president.
Right, exactly. Like it's like how much of having a boyfriend in a box and like a camera obscura, a clairvoyant camera obscura, is how much of that is autobiographical? It's like, right, it's like, of course it's yeah. And it's funny because I mean, I think lots of it's always both true, right? Like Taylor Swift albums are complete creations of fantasy, and Asimov's Foundation is autobiographical, right? Like both are always true, right? You're always pulling apart your own brain, but also it's a playground. Once it's in there, it's it's anyway.
I wanted to go back to the second person for a minute, just because I think it's interesting the way, when I first started teaching creative writing, I'm going to say like 15 years ago, my students were very resistant to second person. They had gotten it into their heads that editors didn't like it, and it just was just something you should never do. And I saw that even more strongly in the science fiction community than in the lit fiction world. That's much less the case now. And I don't know whether it's the rise of fan fiction or what, but people seem to be much more willing to play with second person. I've seen a lot more of it. I was trying to think of like examples, like I've taught Jamaica Kincaid's essay in a small place, which uses second person about tourism in a very confrontational kind of manner. You do this, you do that. And I guess what I would say is that I encourage my students to use second person, but also to think carefully about like the effect of it, because it is a very different effect than first or third. I think it makes the reader complicit, or it makes the reader address their complicitness or experience it. I don't know.
I think and this is like for me too, but just pointing towards that as a theory for that, I think it's also with gaming and looking, because that's largely in a second person. And I wrote, I've been just on the side, not recently, but writing interactive fiction and, which is almost always in the second person, and writing games with Twine, which I think was absolutely an influence on this book. So that second person has always in that, or choose your own adventure books, or that game books, or even role-playing games, that there's an acceptance of second person, I think, that is kind of really filtered in.
Interesting. Like in my regular fiction, I've only used it once, and it was in a story that was about sexual consent, and I wanted the reader to not, I was trying to get the reader to not be able to just like push it off to like some, oh, this is happening to the character, right? Like, and not, or this is the character doing something and I'm not going to be engaged in it. But you're right in that, like, when I've written choose your own adventure books, and Ben has written interactive game fiction recently, and I didn't engage with it in the same way there. Like there, it was more like that's the form. The form is, it's a choose your own adventure. So you do this, you do that. And I used it more broadly, I guess.
It is interesting because, I mean, in those contexts, it feels different because, in fact, the reader has some agency, right? You're being cast in as you, and then you are going to get to make the next choice, which is sort of in a way in the I. So it's like a dialogue. Right. And in a story, the interesting thing about part of what you does is it sort of calls attention to the gap between the you of the book and the you of you. Like on the surface of it, it's like, well, I'm saying this is about you. And maybe in certain contexts, like maybe Jamaica Kincaid's essay, it's like all you do this and I do mean you. But in a story in which, like in this story, it's actually in OKPsyche, it feels like it's in a way the contrast, but the reader is being invited to step out of their usual you into this different you, in a way, but it's one of those things that undermines. We're used to reading first and particularly third person in a way where we immerse ourselves into it and we stop thinking. We don't think about ourselves reading the book. We are just off in swinging the sword, being the what I mean. In a way, type third is the most immersive, maybe just because we're used to it, or that's a common experience. And maybe not for everybody. It's probably not cross-cultural, but at this moment in history with certain readership, it's like you can just sort of relax and think about the story. And the you is sort of, on the one hand, implicating you, on the other hand, is kind of confrontational. It's like you're constantly being reminded in a way that it's the you of the story, but it's not you. Like wherever the you does something that you wouldn't do, there's this consciousness of a gap, and
it's kind of turning back on that, like a lot of the interactive fiction games or the Twine games that were made in like the early 2010s made by queer and trans people are about
Yeah.
those constraints where they give the illusion of choice, but it's about constraint and you don't have
Yeah.
choice.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
Porpentine, Cherry
Yeah.
Hardscape, who's absolutely like
Right.
my favorite, probably one of my favorite writers.
Mm-hmm.
I would say probably the, the 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 best, if I had to put a gun to my head, like the best
Uh-huh.
speculative fiction writer.
Oh,
Well,
wow.
I
Yeah.
missed
Push on the planet.
I missed
Porpentine.
the Porpentine. Okay.
Yeah, and so like Howling Dogs, or was probably her best known game, or Cyber Queen, where um, you it goes to the things where you click the things and you don't have choices, but then you realize, oh, actually, I don't have any choices.
Yeah, all your choices are leading to the same.
I'm being winnowed down,
Funneled.
and
Yeah.
it's you're being funneled, and that, which is again like a very like kind of queer experience in a way.
Yeah.
Of so it's I don't know that,
I was gonna say Twine is a particularly queer IF form.
Yes.
It feels like there's a lot of
it is
also like
yeah
I want to say Anthropy. Anyway, there's like a whole host of yeah. It's interesting.
yeah. So that was a huge influence on the book too.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah. Again, I just really love the language too, and the way in which it's like I love the names like emoji and what's the other character? Like the I mean there's a lot of people, there's a lot of course not named people. Like there's a lot of like we never know the father's name, I think. And you know,
no.
there's a bunch of characters who are kind of like which contributes to the sort of kind of floatiness. But also just the language, like I don't know, there's just all these lines like you empty the old coffee into the dirty sink like expunging the black blood of a minotaur. Which is just awesome. Also, there's a lot of things that are funny. Like it's sort of very dark and very intense, and there's a lot of trauma, but it's also there's a lot that's funny. You know, sometimes just like the fact that, well, again, I don't want to spoil. I don't know whether again, it's hard to know what's spoilery and what's not. But like the fact that an element is introduced, like a boyfriend in a box, and then, you know, like the like, and the payoff that you expect never happens. Like, in a way, it's actually I kept encountering things like that and kind of laughing, like you know, enjoying the playfulness of the you know, the way that the book subverts expectations and you know, there's a lot of things like that are there, or like twists. Like there are a lot of things where I mean, and sometimes like with the example of the sales associate who turns into the ghost of the father or something, that's like not so much funny as unnerving. Like that twist, I think it's partly about pacing. Like that happens at a rate where I'm like, what the fuck is going on? But there's other moments where like the thing is subverted and you're like, oh, it's, you know, it's sort of done. It's sort of funny because of the way that it happens. Yeah.
So we don't have Anya for quite as long as some of our things run sometimes. So I want to be sure that we cover everything you'd like to talk about with this book. Is there anything we haven't touched on that you'd really like us to discuss?
That's a good question. I think I mean, one of the things with well, there are a couple things, but I've also really thought of this as a very Midwestern book too. You know, it's about the middle of the country. It has, without being, you know, like kind of explicitly like regionalist in a comforting way, but I think of that that non-coastal mentality, or of just anxiety about that, I think is, you know, a Rust Belt, especially at the end of the book, you know, was really important to show kind of like a Midwestern queer experience too.
Yeah, that's very
and to highlight the isolation in a way.
I love the thing. That's an example of a funny one. Is the bit where dark but also funny is the bit where the town has one of its sources of income is that California outsources its natural disasters. So so there are like earthquakes and stuff because they're too poor. I mean because their industries have fallen apart. So what they can do is like have the natural disasters for California. That feels like such a great. I mean it's such a funny punchline, but it's also such a great image of like this kind of power dynamic, and in the regions, or like the sort of the like the hookups with the hunters is so where it's like it's sort of like am I going to get shot or are we going to get get it on weird vibe. Also feels very sort of frozen Midwestern woods kind of vibe.
Yeah, and it is very isolated. This is not like a coastal queer city kind of experience, right? This is I feel like if this character were in New York or San Francisco, probably would have had a very different experience of the whole transition, etc., than trying to do this in the Midwest. I mean, I'm just thinking like I went and I spoke at the Because Bi conference, which I think was in Minneapolis.
Oh yeah.
Several years ago, and it was I met a lot of closeted bi people, and it was startling to me because it had been a while since I'd encountered a lot of closeted bi people, right? Because I live in Chicago and run in liberal queer circles, and so I had kind of not quite forgotten, but I kind of lost track of the reality of what it was for still was for a lot of people. It was a good reminder to me.
And it's interesting for me, and part of this is just my own anxiety as a writer, but I think like, because I transitioned, basically in my early 40s, right? And in terms of 2023, although not ever, I mean, that's pretty late, and so I think sometimes I think like, how does like a person like a trans woman who transitioned when she was like 23 read this book, because it is very generational too, of having this previous life, having kids, and just having it just rip the fuck out, of the character just upending everything, and I know, it's not a uniform rosy experience, but I do think the idea of transition is not uniform, and how you approach your life afterwards. So I just think about, I want the book to be meaningful for other trans people, and so I don't like it's curious to me,
but I think that specificity, I mean, I think that's that kind of thing where like it's not like their experience, but it's so evocative of what it is that it, I feel like that's if their experience is very different, it's important for them to know, though.
That's what I don't think it needs to be. I mean, I know a fair number of 16-year-old trans kids, and this is going to be very different for them, but that's okay. I think that's,
but it's also their, in a sense, their history, right? Still at the same time, it's like there's a when you were talking about that, and about the sort of life before that is disrupted. There's a great passage that I totally resonated with about where the protagonist is doing like UX writing for biotech websites, and there's all these good guys, and there's this great part where there are these guys who are just like these sort of almost like innocently square, not toxic. They just like to talk about their board games, and like the protagonist has all this rage because the protagonist has like disguised herself as one of these guys. So like there's this it's the prison, like this sort of unobjectionable, like I want to geek out about the newest iPhone and board games is like the prison that the protagonist has constructed for herself.
Prison.
And that, that's a really, really kind of amazing. Like it's really stark.
That's how you know you're trans. That's how you know you have dysphoria, right? Where it's like, this is a fucking prison.
Right.
I have to get out. And it just took, and just speaking, like personally, I mean, it just took a lot of time to get to that point, right? And I think that's what the book is about. But also, like, once after you transition, it's like, okay, now what? You have all this other trauma. Like the transition solves or kind of unpacks some of that trauma, but then you have to then you still have to do a lot of work,
Well, I think sorry, I was just going to say,
go ahead.
There's, we've talked about kind of like the way this book is hopefully, you hope, resonant for other trans people, but I think one of its great strengths is that, the protagonist goes through transition, and this book is, a lot of it's about the aftermath, right? And about the, what happened when you had a plan for your life, you made decisions, other people were involved in those decisions, you started building something, and then that structure gets destroyed, and you're dealing with everyone is dealing with the fallout, right? And I just feel like that's going to be that piece of it, even for people who have no relevance with trans issues, experience, etc., right? Like if you've been through a divorce, if you've been through, losing the job that your family depends on, things like that, and like, your house is underwater on the mortgage and you get, foreclosed on, right? Like that grief and that, like, how do you start over? I think is very much the emotional heart of the book for me, and kind of like, and this kind of sense of like, it's gonna be super messy for a while, but you're gonna be okay. Like if you do the work, you're gonna be okay at the end.
Which is and there's a secret society, right? It's in the title. It's in the title, and also like there's the secret society of people out there who are like, you can find squatting in their encampment who will be like, first of all, why do you fucking care about fitting in with these normies? But second of all, you're going to be okay. Like, that's very aspirational. But like the secret coven is out there, and I do think it's. I mean, so what you said about the aftermath of a disruption in your life, but the other thing is about the closet, which I think doesn't just have to be queer and trans, but is sort of like any kind of denial of your true self. Like the book is also about how, first of all, you were putting in all this energy denying something about yourself, and then it's not like, yay, now I'm out and that's settled. It's like, oh, my self is so underdeveloped. Like I was, instead of building the self that I am, I was spending all this time in a simulacrum. So now I have to like be, you know what I mean? Like now I have to sort of, it's like there's this undernourished part of myself. I have to like, only now can I start that process of actually constructing it. And that, I feel like that can be about a lot of things where you're kind of like, in denial or.
Well, I see a lot in again, going back to the mom's mailing list I'm on, every couple of days there's someone who's ending their marriage and grieving, like they tried very hard to fit into a box, and a lot of this is around gender norms, and often men who are not doing a fair division of labor and so on, right? And women who kind of like thought they were sort of raised.
Short list episode.
They were kind of raised to think that that if they followed the script, then everything was going to be fine. And then it turns out, no, right? This is not actually the life they want to live, right? So
and in a way, it's like everybody is handed this script, and some people are gonna accommodate better because the script is not as off. So like the pain is particularly acute if the script is completely wrong. But in a way, right? Like the way that I feel like that's like my kid, like stuff where my kids have had like sensory issues and stuff. And it's like the kids who have like sensory or ADHD or whatever it is, it's like partly it's just like, well, actually for all kids, like sitting in rows in desks in a boxy room indoors all day is like an inhuman situation. But like some of them can like squeeze themselves into the capitalism and not show the distress, and some of them like just can't deal, and if you don't give them a fidget thing they're just gonna fly all over the room. Like they're like the canaries in the coal mine. But and so I feel like it's in a way it's like I don't know that anybody really loves their gender roles. And if you're actually not the if you're at well no people do love no not that people don't love doing gender, because people do love doing gender.
I don't know, I'm just hesitant to say that. I'm thinking specifically of something like I do make a distinction between gender and gender role. I'm not saying everybody who's a center on gender. They're not. Lots of people exist, but I'm saying that is a thing where I'm just saying I think the idea. Well, you're talking about the in the book, he was literally passing as like a board game loving geek guy, and that was like a prison of absolute. But you're saying there's like the woman who's just been feeling like if she had her Cinderella story and why isn't he doing the dishes, is not she's not dramatically in the wrong script, but she's still somewhat in the, you know what I mean? Like there still is a lie there in a way. So, it's sort of a universal experiance. Yeah. Okay.
It's interesting. With Tori Peters' book Detransition Baby, like, and she's talked about this, like how like she feels. And this is a very broad paraphrase of like, what like one of the big audiences, or some of the people she connects with most are actually like middle-aged divorced women, who just like a lot of, for those same reasons, who like go through, I mean, like I would say like, like kind of a transition with a lowercase t in that way, so but so
like this isn't the life that
connection has
this
been
turned
made.
out to be the wrong life. Like the sense of like that this turned out to be the wrong life, you know what I mean? Or but I think lots of kinds of hiding have certain isomorphisms with the closet. It's funny that I know kids here in Basel in 2023. I know like young adults, friends of my kids, who are perfectly comfortable being out as queer at university, but not being out as Jewish. Like that, which strikes me as very creepy, and very different from my experience. But do you know what I mean? Like there's a lot of kind of, or like immigrants, kind of like passing as the culture that you've,
I think what I was trying to get to, let me is that. So I had an experience, right, where my kids were little. I had trouble breastfeeding. They didn't sleep through the night till 9 months each. We were exhausted. Kevin did everything he could. It was brutal. And I was mostly talking to other parents, moms, who were saying, yes, it's brutal, right? Like this is a big lie they've told us. It's just awful, et cetera, so on. And then I met this woman, and she was just bewildered because she co-slept with her kids. Breastfeeding had been easy. It was blissful for her. Like the whole thing was just lovely. And I wanted to kill her, but I mean, it's like so full of rage. But at the other hand, I was like, oh, this is not a lie for everyone. There are people for whom this is their experience. And then capitalism and patriarchy and so on steps in and says, ooh, if we convince all women that that's going to be their experience, that's going to work out well for us, capitalism and patriarchy, right? And so there are these outside forces that are propping. That's I think what I'm trying to get to. There are outside forces that are propping up some of these identity visions, shapes, whatever you want to call them. But it doesn't mean that shape isn't the right shape for some people.
No, certainly is. Certainly is. But I'm also curious, you going back and check in with that woman, now 20 years later, like, so she hit the jackpot on like the co-sleeping and the breastfeeding. How was potty training? How was going to school? How was being how was work with Do you know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
how was the college hunt? Like, did all the lies that capitalism tells turn out to just work out for like? Because I'm not saying they couldn't have, but it's like
Yeah.
you're rolling the dice
Right, yeah,
each
yeah, yeah.
time. You know, like
Right,
there's a
right,
bunch of
yeah.
like myth. Norms are a myth, right? There's some
Right.
norm that you're invited into, and it's like, sure, it's designed based on somebody's experience. But I'm just saying, like, sooner or later, like most people, like, and lots of people are enough close to the norm that they just don't. Maybe it
Yeah.
doesn't even rise to the level of consciousness, but you know.
Yeah. So.
But there's some
And I
way
think
in which it's always, yeah.
Yeah, and I think with the book, and this gets into like the political dystopias, like when I first started writing this in like fragments, like 2000, like 14, 2015, like it was like the landscape for some trans people seemed like it was certainly not all, but like it seemed like, okay, that there is this arc of, acceptability and tolerance. Like a lot of the dystopian stuff that I wrote at that time ended up the gap between the speculative elements and like what ended
it
up
kept
happening,
narrowing.
like started
Yeah.
closing.
Right.
I mean, like,
right.
Like it was very weird for me because I live in Minneapolis and St. Paul, and just with the summer of 2020, with the murder of George Floyd, and just just more in the periphery, but just having National Guard convoys, like speeding down when I'm going to get groceries.
Yeah.
This is really fucked. This is really through the looking glass shit.
Yeah.
For
you had just written this scene as dystopian science fiction, and then it came true before you could.
Yeah, there are soldiers on the corner, and it was very. And I think the pandemic itself, kind of exacerbated those feelings of unreality as well. So
yeah,
which is interesting, and I think in a way, like just like in re-editing a book, soldering all these fragments together. I mean, I think that made an impact in turning this in from a bunch of like writing or interrelated stories maybe into like something that could be called a novel.
Yeah.
So
I would totally. I'd call it a novel.
It is a novel, but I wanted to ask about the process too, because we didn't talk much about that. I mean, now you sort of we've segued onto that, but like I am if there's more you want to say about that, I'm kind of curious about how how much you knew in advance how it was going to cohere, what you feel like were the moments of figuring out its shape, or what were the like what came together when. I don't know. I'm just interested in any of that, and also the process of like then going and deciding it's done and working with small beer and anything else you want to,
Yeah, sure. So like, at first we're just like a series of interrelated stories. Like the first chapter was actually published as a short story by Heather Shaw's magazine, Persistent Visions. That was my first story published as Anya. Cool. So there were just these pieces that I was writing in like second person, and I thought, well, maybe this is just like a linked thing of stories, and then all these like little fragments are like kind of like this archipelago of moments came out, and then it just started accreting, and then it's like, okay, finally it just is a very slow process of like seeing like the arc of the story of the development of this character, and then putting a lot of the stuff with Cupid and Psyche kind of came in later as connective tissue. And then it's like, oh, I have 40,000 words of this, and and I'm like, okay, like kind of now what? And I figured, I sent it to a few other small presses, but it seemed like small beer would be a good home for us. I said, hey, Gavin, do you want to read this? And he said yes, and it kind of went from there. But I was actually like at the years after my first transition, I like tried to become a YA writer, right? And I had a YA novel done about a trans girl dragon rider, and that it never sold. It was a very frustrating experience, to be honest. So this was always going on in the background of that, along with like some other short stories and stuff. So it's like, this is it's almost like that desire, like the desire to have it as a novel and to kind of decide that it is a novel, and kind of making that idea of a novel kind of elastic in that way, and I think it is. So like it just in terms of other kind of uh like stories that are multiplicitous, that lots of things get called novels in the literary world, so I think
it's funny because I didn't even realize there were pieces of it were short stories, and it feels very much like a coherent, like a novel to me, to the extent that I'm a little like, it's kind of funny. I mean, you have a very different view of it since you probably, because of its history. But in Reddit, I didn't novel, and you have the sense of like, oh, this was probably like some individual short stories that somebody stitched together or something. But it does not, to me, have that feeling of being like a fix up.
A fix up, yeah,
yeah,
and it wasn't. It turned into something coherent, from that. So
yeah.
Just kind of, I use this metaphor a lot, but of like building the plane and while you're flying it, just that's what it's, this kind of became that. So, but I'm been really thrilled about the care and attention that has been given to the book by Gavin and Kelly, and just the readers who have read it, just been very grateful for their experiences with the book too. So it's been that's really been a dream. So
I think we should start heading towards wrapping up. And this seems like a really monumental accomplishment to me, and I want to ask you what you're working on next, but I also am like, if you want to take a year to just like chill, that seems totally justified. And,
I could. I'm working on we're working on a couple short stories, just here and there. I actually have enough for a third collection, a first Anya collection. I would love to do a collection that's like new and selected stories of taking kind of the stories from the previous two collections that I'm happiest with and that have aged well, and kind of republish them and as Anya. So I'm trying to figure out what to do with that, and then I'm working on I guess it's going to be a novella about it's about a subdivision, and I don't even know, like in hell, where you know evangelical preachers accidentally open up a gate to hell, just because they're themselves, it's kind of a form of like Pentecostal demonism. And so hell actually wants to close all the gates, and they want nothing to do with us anymore. So that's kind of what the novel or the novella is about. about closing those gates. So I don't know, that's still in progress. But I just approach writing as a process, just try to be as process oriented as possible. So I move around a lot between different projects. And of what interests me, and work on poems sometimes. So how that intersects with the publishing world, that's always
Complicated.
an adventure. So
yeah. I want to put on my nonprofit administrator hat for 1 second, just to say that. Well, no, I'm not going to try and get Anya to do more work. This is not. But I was just thinking about the fact. So I don't know whether you have applied for Minnesota Arts Council. You're in Minnesota, am I remembering right? Yeah, Minnesota Arts Council grants. But I have sat on the review committee for both the Illinois and the Wisconsin Arts Council, and this would have absolutely been competitive and a likely winner in either of those. And the Illinois Arts Council gives out $15,000 grants, and so I just hope that's on your radar for applying for Arts Council grants. They're a little bit of work, but I think you'd have a very good shot.
And especially after the pandemic, I've just been so isolated from that world, and
so here's the process. It's very simple. Go to the Minnesota Arts Council website, look to see what their grants are, see what the deadline is, put it in your calendar as a recurring Google Calendar thing, and with a notification a week ahead of time to check on it, and then take an hour to fill out, block out an hour in your calendar to fill out the application, and then send it in. So that's my recommendation to you and to anyone who's writing genre fiction on the more, artsy literary side of things. I'd love to see this work getting that kind of support going forward. So that's my
cool. And I'm doing readings here and there, so when I can fit them in.
So if readers want to find you, where should they look for you going forward?
They should go to A DeNiro on Blue Sky. I'm not on Twitter anymore. And then my website is AnyaJohannaDeNiro.com, and there's a contact form there. I'm more than happy to reach out for me there. I also have a Patreon, which is more of an online tip jar. I've been trying to do a little more with it, but that's A DeNiro as well. So
that's awesome. Ben, do you have any
we'll have links
things?
in the we'll have links in the show notes. We should let you go, but this was great, and I really liked this book. I just thought it was brilliant.
Nominated for the Tiptree readers. So, or the otherwise award, damn it.
The otherwise.
Yes. Nominated.
You can tell we're old.
Yeah, we are old. So, and this was just great. And thank you for, I loved the reading experience. I was completely caught up in it, and just, I don't know, I read a lot, and sometimes I'm, trudging through things and whatever, and this was a painful delight start to finish. I don't know, I really loved it.
Thank you so much for the care and attention, having me on and having that conversation about it. It was great.
Awesome. All right, thank you. That's it, everybody.
Okay.
We'll be back soon.